November 28th, 1953, 2:30 in the morning. A man falls 10 floors from a New York hotel window. The official story took 22 years to fall apart. His name was Frank Olson, and the government had already decided how he died before his body hit the sidewalk. Frank Olson wasn't a soldier, and he wasn't a spy. He was a bacteriologist, one of the country's leading experts in airborne biological weapons, working out of Camp Detrick, Maryland. By 1953, Olson held one of the most sensitive security clearances in America. He moved between the Army's biological warfare program and a much darker CIA project, one with a name that's since become shorthand for everything the agency denied for decades: MK Ultra. On November 18, 1953, Olson and a handful of fellow scientists were invited to a retreat at a remote cabin on Deep Creek Lake. The cover story was a working conference. The real purpose was something else entirely. That evening, a CIA chemist named Robert Lashbrook, deputy to MK Ultra's architect Sidney Gottlieb, spiked the group's after-dinner Cointreau with LSD. No one was told. No one consented. Olson drank it without a second thought. The next morning, he went home to his wife and 3 children, a different man. In the days that followed, Olson changed. He grew paranoid, anxious, withdrawn. He told colleagues he'd made a terrible mistake. He talked about resigning. What his family didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that Olson had recently witnessed things in Europe tied to his work that he couldn't unsee. Interrogations, experiments, the cost of the science he'd helped build. Now there was a drug in his system he'd never agreed to take, and a mind that was coming apart in real time. His supervisors didn't send him to a hospital. They sent him to New York. Olson arrived in New York under the watch of CIA handlers. He saw an allergist named Harold Abramson, who was quietly experimenting with LSD himself. He sat through a strange session with a stage magician, brought in by some accounts to study his behavior. None of it helped. If anything, Olson grew more convinced he was being watched, which of course he was. On the night before Thanksgiving, he checked into room 1018A at the Hotel Statler with Robert Lashbrook, the same man who dosed his drink 9 days earlier. They shared the room, 2 beds, 10 feet apart. Only one of them would leave it alive. Around 2:30 in the morning, Olson went through the closed window of a 10th floor room, drawn shade, curtains and all, and fell to the pavement below. The hotel's night manager later said that in all his years in the business, he'd never seen anything like the way Olson would have had to move to make that fall happen. Minutes later, a phone call went out from that same room to a doctor's number on Long Island. The caller said only 2 words: "He's gone." Police ruled it a suicide within hours. Case closed. For 22 years, that was the only story Olson's family was ever told. In 1975, the Rockefeller Commission published a report on CIA abuses. Buried on page 37 was a single line about an Army scientist who'd been given LSD without consent and died. No name, no details. It took the Olson family less than 10 days to put it together. Within 2 weeks, they were sitting in the Oval Office, receiving a personal apology from President Gerald Ford. A year later, they settled with the government for $750,000 and agreed to never sue again. But Eric Olson, Frank's son, was just getting started. In 1994, Eric had his father's body exhumed. A new forensic team examined what was left. What they found didn't match a man who'd run across a dark room and dove through a closed window. There was a trauma to Olson's skull, Consistent, the examiner said, with a blow before he ever reached that window. Not proof of murder, but proof that suicide was never the whole story. To this day, the case remains officially unsolved. Frank Olson's file is one of thousands. Most of MK Ultra's records were destroyed in 1973 on direct orders from the CIA's own director. We'll never know everything that happened in that room, but we know enough to know they lied. If this kind of history matters to you, subscribe. There's more buried in the archive.